What is going on, everyone? This is Zach from Clutch Crew Sports, back with another podcast episode. And here on today's episode, we're going to talk about NFL training camp storylines. Some of the biggest news around the league, around the Shield regarding the NFL, talking about different things you might be hearing in the news and as they relate to training camp. So, it's going to be a fun sort of discussion to get the NFL season started. And let me introduce you to the rest of the crew.
Yo, what's up, everyone? It's Eric, the ranting co-host here. Glad to be back. It feels weird when we're not able to do these every week with not much sports going on. So glad to be back together for another episode, and hope you guys enjoy.
What's up, guys? It's Connor, the co-host with the most. And yeah, like Eric said, glad to be back doing this. This has been our first real normal podcast episode in a while. I know we technically did the podcast last week, but that was just me mopping the floor with Zach and Sports Jeopardy. But it's good. Shots fired. But yeah, good to just have a normal episode again. It's been a while since we've had one of these.
Yeah, no, definitely. Honestly, I can't even remember the last time all three of us did a normal episode. It's over a month for sure. So, but we've been making all this YouTube content on our own, so it's not like we've been away from the microphone itself, But these podcasts are different than the solo style videos. So, like I said, this is going to be all talk around the Shield. That's primarily what we're going to be focusing on, and I've kind of divided up today's topics into four groups. We've got the off the field storylines going on. Of course, those are always big. The quarterback battles, I think that's really what training camp every year. There's a few teams that have these QB battles. They don't name a starter. And so there's always like a competition. So we'll get into that. Some contract situations, either guys that could be traded or just don't have a contract that they should have, and how that impacts training camp, being away from the team for a while and just the uncertainty around that. And then old name, new places, talking about a few of the guys, big name quarterbacks that jumped to new teams. So we'll talk about that. And yeah, so let's get things started with the off the field. And this year's off the field stuff has been even bigger than it was last year. Honestly, it's one of the biggest, off the field headlines and since I can remember. But we'll start with the first one, which is Desean Watson. Obviously, we all know the independent judge gave Desean Watson a 6-game suspension. She wrote a whole report. I think it was like 18 pages of her facts of findings, which, that's the information the NFL has on its appeal that it can use. It has to use those facts of findings. Now, it was also interesting. This is, I think if you haven't followed the story super, super closely, you might, and understandably, think that 6 games is not enough. However, the NFL was only looking at 5 of his accusers' complaints. They only interviewed, I think, 4 or 5 of them. So they weren't looking at Desean Watson with 25 lawsuits. They were looking at him with only 5, which is, something that I think most people wouldn't know. And I think that's why it was only 6 games handed out from the judge. I think if she'd been looking at it from all 25, I think it would have been bigger. But the NFL appealed the 6-game suspension. Obviously, they didn't feel that was enough. They wanted a whole season, possibly indefinite. So clearly they want more. I think they're going to end up coming to a middle ground, so to say, of like a 10 to 12 games. I don't think it'll be a full season. I think, that if they tried to go to a full season, I think that would it would just kind of be a little bit of a bad look that it's like, hey, why do you even have this judge if you're just going to go with what you were going to go with originally? What's the point of even having all this? And then, it just seems like that'd be a massive increase to go to a whole season. So I think what they're going to end up doing is kind of where it probably should have been originally be like 10, 12 games around that ballpark, which even though that's not a whole season, that might not please everybody, but that's that's a big chunk of the season for the Browns not having their quarterback. So the Browns season, if he misses 10 to 12 games, is going to be heavily disrupted. If it's only 6, there's still a chance for him. But Eric, I'll start with you first. What were your thoughts when you first heard about the suspension? What do you feel like happens when the NFL makes its new ruling? Obviously, nobody's going to be happy with this. This is not a situation where you can please everybody, but what do you think happens with Watson here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed that up pretty well. I agree. I think it's probably going to go to about 10 to 12 games. Personally, like my feelings have been pretty torn on it because obviously if everything he did or if everything that all these accusers are saying he did is true, then I mean it should be an indefinite suspension. I mean a year minimum. But the thing is for me, and like what makes me be torn on it, instead of versus like reacting emotionally, is that there still hasn't really been any evidence presented. I mean, it didn't even end up going to trial, and they ended up getting settlements with all of them. It never went to court. Like, they've had all the accusers and their lawyers and everybody have had like all this time to, bring forth all this like they've had against them. But if that's the case, like, why hasn't it really been, brought forth into the light ever? So part of that makes me feel like, I don't think he's completely clean. Like, I don't think he's not guilty or anything, but I feel like it's definitely been overblown most likely. So I'm torn on where to feel about the suspension, but I mean, anywhere from, like 8 to 12 games, I think is right. Just based on the, evidence that we have, I think. But like I said, if there was like crazy evidence that he like, really did what they're saying he did, or if he like raped them or something, then, he should be gone. But we just don't have the evidence that proves that.
Yeah. So I will say the judge, she did actually find him guilty. She found him at fault of lying and of committing some of these things that the accusations have been. I don't think any of the accusations came to the level of rape, but either way, it's still not good. I mean, obviously his reputation is tarnished, whether you believe it or not. People are going to believe it. So Connor, do you just have anything else to add on to this before we go on? I know this is like the biggest of the big news, so that's why I wanted to get both of your guys' words on it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that I actually wouldn't be surprised if they go to a full season. Like, I would disagree that I think it's set in stone that it's going to be 10 to 12 because, like, no matter what happens, it's going to increase. And no matter what happens, the NFLPA is going to sue them anyway. Like, it doesn't matter if they increase it by 2 games, they're going to get sued. So, like, at that point, it's like, okay, well, then who cares anymore? Like, I might as well just go with what we wanted to do if they're going to sue us no matter what. So, I don't think it's set in stone that's going to be 10 to 12. And I will say for him, like, the fact that none of them have gone to trial to me really doesn't clear him at all, because civil cases in general rarely go to trial ever, no matter what the case is. And the situation behind these, like, unless they were like physically assaulted, there's really never any way to prove that any of these actually happened. You just have to go by word of mouth. That was the wrong way to word that. You just have to go by word of mouth. So, and it's one of those things that, depending on what side of the fence you're on, not taking sides or anything, but, some people, when you settle all these cases, to some people, that's like, a sign of, oh, there's not enough evidence, blah, 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 blah. But to others, that's an admission of guilt, because, like I said, civil cases rarely go to trial. So I don't think it's set in stone that it could be 10 to 12 games, just because, like I said, they're going to get sued anyway. So if we're going to get sued, we might as well just go. But it definitely, like you said, impacts the Browns season, because if he ends up being suspended for, like I said, even if it's 12 games, it's like the Browns went from a potential playoff contender to they could possibly finish last in the division, because we've seen how bad Jacoby Brissett is. And, you can have all the talent in the world on your team. If your quarterback isn't good, then, it's pretty much game over for you. So it's definitely something I know the Browns and the rest of everyone's anticipating. And I feel like I speak for probably everyone, just saying, I just want this to be over. Like, I'm ready to hear about something else besides this. Like, it's basically been a 2-year saga now, and it's like, can we just move on? Like, geez.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's I mean, it's just a bad look, I think, for the league. Browns fans, I feel a little bad for them being in this situation. Like, they didn't ask for this kind of a controversy quarterback, and then they gave him all the money. It's like
traded away all the draft picks.
Yeah, it's this is huge. I mean, it's going to be real, just like awkward if he ends up playing and then the announcers like praising him for a great pass. It's like, is that going to turn some people away? But I mean, the NFL, as we know, always when it has challenges like COVID or other things, they usually end up coming out on top. So I think that's what will happen with this. I think eventually we'll get over the suspension, whatever it is, and our lives will go back to how they were before. But the other big off the field storyline that came out, I don't think this was definitely not a coincidence. The NFL dropped this the day after Desean Watson, to try and take off some of the heat for that thing. But Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, fined, I think, $1 or $2 million. They've lost 1 first-round pick, a 3rd-round pick. I know he's like suspended from the team or something for 6 weeks, which is a joke, honestly. The fact that
it's actually 6 months, I think, other than 6 weeks.
Oh, 6 months? I thought it was 6 weeks. But
wait, no, hold on. I don't think it's either of those. Actually, I think it's half the season. Is he suspended for half the season or something like that? Like the other person who got suspended for the whole year, but he's suspended for like half the season or something like that.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, so he's got a suspension, but
still a joke, but I agree.
Yeah. Also, the $1 million fine was a joke. I mean, that's like pocket change for these billionaire owners. But, but so this was honestly, it was twofold. So the NFL, obviously, everybody knows that the NFL was going to say the Dolphins didn't tank, because if they admitted the Dolphins tank, there would have been lawsuits. They would have had so much more to deal with if the Dolphins had. I mean, Congress might have gotten involved. Like, this is just something the NFL. We won't know if the Dolphins truly. Obviously, Flores didn't tank, but the intentions were there to tank. And so this punishment was for the tampering thing with Brady. For two seasons. They tried to tamper with the Patriots and Buccaneers, when Brady was a member of those teams, and then Sean Payton from the Saints. So, I mean, clearly, tampering is something that is often occurs. It definitely happens. Everybody does it. They just went to another level with it, I think. And then also too, this is sort of their informal tanking punishment. I think, the NFL isn't going to say that they were punishing them for tanking. They're going to say they punished them for tampering, and that's why they made it so severe. But honestly, I think it should have been more, based on what Flores has said, who I trust Flores out of everybody in this situation. But yeah, the Dolphins, I think, are lucky to only lose what they lost. Eric, what do you think about this Dolphins situation?
Yeah, I agree, man. I think they should have got punished more, just based on what I've heard so far. Like, I will admit I haven't researched this as much as most people, but the draft picks, not so much. Like, I felt like, because losing a first round pick is pretty substantial. The 3rd round pick is probably like whatever, but that's a future year. But I mean, what these guys got fined is like $1 million or whatever when they're, multi-billionaires. I mean, that's a joke. That doesn't hurt them in any way at all. So, I think what would have been more punishable would have been if they had done something like, maybe even more draft picks, or I don't know if they can do this, but if maybe done some kind of like, instead of the owner paying $1 million, like take a certain amount of money like off of their salary cap for a season, like next year or something, like they get like 5 million less,
or force them to give
or,
up the ownership of the team.
And that would be, I mean, that's a good point.
But if they'd have done that, then they would have admitted that that would have opened up the lawsuits for tanking.
Oh yeah.
So that's why I'm saying that's probably what should have happened. But I mean, there was no chance of that happening.
No.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I was gonna say too. Like, I mean, like you said about with Flores, like I definitely agree with you that I agree with Flores, because like, I mean, especially given the way that he left the team, it's like, who fires their head coach? Like, when a team that was supposed to be rebuilding came within like a half game of the playoffs, just about, like, who fires their coach in that situation? Like, clearly they knew that he was going to try and expose what was going on, and they didn't want him around anymore. They didn't want to be associated with him anymore. It's not like, it's not like they had 2 straight seasons of being like, 3-14 or whatever. And, that was justifiable. Like, that was the biggest head scratcher of head coach firings that I've had in a while, where I was like, really? Like, they fired Brian Flores? Like, that was dumb. So,
well, I remember their basis on that was that like him and Tua didn't get along, and so they wanted to keep Tua over him. That's what was said when he first got fired, but that was still pretty sketchy.
I mean, that was clearly it. The reason he was fired is because they were going to make Sean Payton Brady and Sean Payton were this close. The Flores honestly prevented all that. And that's why Brady did his weird retirement thing and Sean Payton did his retirement. Like, if Flores if he just kept quiet and not, said anything, that would have ended up happening. And that's why they did it ultimately, I think. And, they're going to suffer for it, obviously, with losing the draft pick. But let's move along now to other on the field sort of topics and talk about the QB battle. So there's really, 3 teams in my eyes that have these battles going on, and some of them are more of a battle than others. But we'll start with the first one. The Carolina Panthers have 2 guys from the same draft class picked in the first round, Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield competing. And right now it seems like, Sam Darnold, they're saying, knows the offense better. So that's why he's not, that's why Baker hasn't completely won the job yet. I do think this is more of just a formality thing, a sort of make him prove it. If Baker looks terrible, then they can say, oh, we never made Baker the starter. So maybe throw Sam Darnold out week one, see if he struggles, which he probably will, then go to Baker. But Connor, what do you think about this battle? Do you think it's truly a legit thing? Do you think it's a sham? Do you think Darnold has any chance really of winning this, or what?
I mean, if it is truly a legit competition, then the Panthers need to seriously be questioning their decision making, because, I'm not exactly the biggest Baker Mayfield fan, but he's a huge upgrade over Sam Darnold. Like, there should be no doubt. I mean, I know I can somewhat believe the argument of like, oh, well, he doesn't know the offense and blah, blah, blah. But there should be no doubt in my mind that Baker Mayfield should be the QB week 1 and for the whole season. Like, it's even one of those things, like, if Baker were to struggle, it's like, bringing in Sam Darnold wouldn't do much better. Like, if I was the Panthers, actually, like, if I would start Baker, and if he would start to struggle, I would bring in Matt Corral instead, because I think they just need to move on from Sam Darnold. Like, he should be done as a starting quarterback in the NFL.
No, I agree, and that's why they even brought in Baker, is because they weren't impressed with Darnold and the OTAs and such. So, yeah, it seems weird that it's taking this long, and it's really going to hurt Mayfield because he's not getting all the number 1 reps. They're doing sort of a day-to-day thing. Sam plays with all the ones on Monday. Baker plays with all the ones on Tuesday. But we've also in the NFC got the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, 2 guys with less expectations in that quarterback battle, being Geno Smith and Drew Locke. I think Honestly, I think they want Geno Smith to win. I think Geno Smith will end up winning just because Drew Locke is kind of reckless with the football, throws a lot of interceptions, not a great decision maker. They're obviously going to want to go to a run first style team. And I think obviously he also has familiarity with the offense being Russell Wilson's backup. But I think Pete Carroll's is in one of these sort of like Bill Belichick phase of like moving on from his great quarterback, and he's going to try and show the world, that he can do it with Geno Smith and try and make him look like a better head coach. And as silly as it sounds, honestly, I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think Jimmy G is going to go there or some other, wild card in play. But Eric, who do you think ends up winning this QB battle?
I think it's a lock that Geno Smith is going to get it. Yeah, I mean, they're both terrible, but yeah, like you said, Geno Smith has familiarity with the offense. He's played with these guys. He's played with Lockett and Metcalf. He knows the system better. And I mean, it is kind of sad for, Drew Locke, though, that, you can't even beat out Geno Smith for the quarterback job. I mean, I don't know. It's just,
I forgot he existed until last year.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's going to be Geno Smith, but I know my friend Andy, he's a big Seahawks fan, and he hates Geno Smith with every fiber in his being. But I still think if I had to guess, he would probably still want Geno over Drew Locke just because of how bad he is. So I don't know, man. It's crazy because I haven't done my Seahawks preview yet, but I do feel like they have some good pieces on that team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But this quarterback situation is really going to, hinder them, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And last but not least, getting to Connor's Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a case of seems like the veteran's going to get the upper hand and start, but I know you've been very critical about Mitch Trubisky. Do you have anything positive to say if he's the week 1 starter, or are you just ready for Pickett time?
I mean, the positive thing that I would have coming out of him being the week 1 starter would be that it wouldn't be Mason Rudolph, because like I saw this like thing posted on Facebook on the Steelers page about like, someone had posted the training camp stats or whatever, and Rudolph was leading the way. He had like 450 yards and like 11 touchdowns and no picks. And like Trubisky had like 300 yards and 8 touchdowns and 2 picks. And I'm like, okay, well, like, first of all, like Mason knows the offense. So that's kind of not surprising, but like, there's no way that Mason Rudolph should ever be a starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers ever again. Like, he has pretty much proven that he sucks. And the only reason why he's still around right now is because he's still under contract. But once he's under contract, he's going to be gone. So, I mean, there is a little bit in my mind that thinks hopefully Trubisky can do something, but I mean, for the most part, I'm ready for Kenny Pickett. Like, I'm ready for the new QB to get in and get started. I mean, we took him in the first round, so if we had taken him in the 3rd round, like how the Panthers had done with Corral and the Falcons with Ritter and the Titans with Willis, then like I wouldn't be. I'd probably be more willing to give him time, but like, we picked him in the first round, so. Especially when there's no clear better option. Like if we had, I almost don't want to think about this, but if we had like Andy Dalton, for example, like I'd be okay with Andy Dalton, like starting for the season and letting Pickett sit behind him for a year. But when it's Mitch Trubisky, like I'm just ready for Kenny Pickett.
Come on, man. You don't want Mitchell, David, Trubisky throwing the ball out there?
I mean, he was a Pro Bowler as like a 4th alternate or something.
He's a Nickelodeon Game of the Week award winner.
I do always laugh at the whole Pro Bowl thing. Like, he had a Pro Bowl, and I'm like, the way the Pro Bowl works these days, like there are so many alternates that end up getting spots in the Pro Bowl because so many people sit it out. Like, who even is a Pro Bowler anymore? Like the only people
I could probably get in the Pro Bowl if I tried,
Right. Like the only people that I really consider Pro Bowlers at this point are the ones that were like on the very first like ballot of votes, like, with no alternates included, like just first ballot of votes. Those are the Pro Bowlers. All the alternates that come in don't count in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. In pro, I don't even consider Pro Bowl an honor. It's just a name popularity contest. All Pro is the where the
Right.
writers and the actual people that watch the game, they and obviously it's more select. There's less all pro positions than Pro Bowlers, but yeah, so
you're right. That's a real honor to be like first team all pro. Like that's a real honor.
yeah. But moving on now, there's always during training camp, I don't know if there's any real holdouts this year. It seems like the receivers are all happy. They're all happy now. They got paid. But some quarterbacks are definitely in some weird spots. And, Lamar, I don't think there's any risk of him leaving the Ravens, so to say. It wouldn't be crazy if the Ravens somehow, were like, I'm tired of dealing with contract negotiations and left him after 2 more years. But, what do you think ends up happening with Lamar's contract, Eric? Do you think he gets a new deal before the season starts? And if not, do you think that's going to be a problem for the Ravens this year?
I would expect that most likely, since they're already in training camp and everything now and getting ready to go into preseason and still haven't gotten a contract yet, that they probably won't get one done by the time the season starts. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be any problem. I haven't heard any like rumors about Lamar's really pissed off or Lamar doesn't want to play or anything like that. I don't expect it to be any problem this year. Now, if it gets into the off season next year and they still haven't gotten anything, maybe then I could see it being a problem. But as for right now, I don't think it's a big deal.
Connor, do you agree with that or do you disagree at all? Because I kind of disagree with Eric, but I'll see if you want to say anything first.
Yeah, I would say I probably kind of disagree a little bit too. I mean, just given his status as a former MVP and this all-worldly talent that he is, like I do think it's a little bit of a problem. And like I know he's been, I don't know, he hasn't he hasn't been vocal about leaving the team. Like some people have tried to call him out and he'll like shut them down. But especially given for his sake that he represents himself, he doesn't have an agent. I think that's a problem when it comes to contract negotiations. Like any player in my mind that doesn't have an agent is stupid. Like unless a lot of these players aren't educated enough to be, their own agent and handle their finances and everything. So, it's whoever, if you don't have an agent, then you're being stupid and it's going to make getting a deal done harder. So the longer that it sticks around and doesn't get done, I mean, I think that is a problem.
Yeah, no, I agree with Connor for sure on this. But the next guy is not necessarily fighting for a next big contract. Jimmy G. However, I think it's like 25 million or something, which for a starting quarterback, that's not bad, but he's not going to be their starting quarterback this year. It's going to be Trey Lance. So you don't want to pay 25 million for a backup. So Eric or we'll start with Connor on this. Connor, do you think Jimmy G gets cut? Do you think he takes less money to stay with the team? Does he get traded? What do you think? And if he does get cut and becomes a free agent, what are some teams that you think he could go to? I know I've heard the Texans as a possibility, the Giants maybe. Obviously, any team that gets a big injury at quarterback would be a likely team. But what do you think the market is for Jimmy G?
Yeah, I'd say out of all those options, I'd say the most likely is that he gets cut just because, like, it's not going to cost the Niners as much to cut him as it would have in years past because a lot of his guaranteed money is run out at this point. So, and just the problem for him, especially, like, since he hasn't been traded yet, like, there's just no one to trade him to at this point. No one wants to take on his contract. Everybody's pretty much got their quarterback situation figured out, The only one that's really still questionable is the Seahawks, but the Seahawks aren't going to trade for him. Like there's been rumors about that, and there's like nothing's been happening. So the Seahawks aren't going to trade for him. And I said I think he gets cut. I think he'll end up being one of these like you said, like a kind of a mid-season pickup if someone has a bad injury. I think that's more so what it's going to be for him because, like I said, at this point, everyone's got their situation figured out. And, until someone goes down with an injury, I think he's going to be just sitting at home watching the games, and then one day someone's going to give him a call and be like, hey, so, our first and second string quarterbacks got hurt, and yeah, you want to come back and play? Sure, why not? I think that's how that's going to go.
I mean, I think if a starter goes down, I don't think he's going to be after a second string. He would beat out pretty much every second stringer on every team.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
But I do think this is not a crazy thing to say if he gets cut and then Trey Lance gets hurt, because Trey Lance in his only 2 games he played last year got hurt in both of them with different injuries. So it's crazy if that would happen, how awkward it's been with him in the 49ers last few years. But, if Trey Lance goes down, the Niners have nobody other than Jimmy G. That's for sure. So now we'll end this episode off by talking about some new quarterbacks or old quarterbacks on new teams. Obviously, Russell Wilson and Matt Ryan are the 2 big ones. So I'll just kind of ask each of you guys this question. Which of these 2 do you see as most likely to do what Brady and Matt Stafford did in their first year on a new team and go win a Super Bowl? Do you think, obviously, Russell Wilson's probably viewed as the better quarterback, maybe even the better team, but he does play in the AFC West versus Matt Ryan in the AFC South. So, Eric, which of these 2 would you pick to have most likely to make a Super Bowl run?
I like short term, I'd say Matt Ryan because of the better situation, but I still don't think it's going to happen. I'm still going to go long.
You don't think it's going to happen, or you're hoping it doesn't happen?
Well, obviously, I'm more so hoping it doesn't happen, but I still really don't think it's going to happen. I'm not as impressed with Matt Ryan. I know like Connor and some other people still like think he has it, but I don't blame Matt Ryan, for everything with the Falcons, but I don't know. Matt Ryan just has seemed to be regressing to me somewhat, and I just don't think he has a lot of time left in the tank. So I think with him, it's going to be like a now or never kind of thing. Like I think it's going to have to be this year. But with Russell Wilson, I still think he has enough time. Maybe Denver's not going to, they may not contend for a Super Bowl this year, just being in that crazy division and just how loaded the AFC is. But Russell Wilson's definitely more talented, and I think within the next year or 2, the Broncos will get even better. And I can see Russell Wilson making another run at a Super Bowl before I see Matt Ryan doing it.
All right, Connor, same question to you. Who are you picking between these 2?
So in my opinion, I see no chance for Matt Ryan to do it. I don't think the Colts are good enough. Like I can definitely see them winning the division and, making it to the playoffs and possibly getting a win or 2 here or there, but I just don't think they're good enough. And like I agree, like I do still think Matt Ryan has it, but I do agree he's been regressing too. And the Colts really don't have the greatest wide receiver situation in the world, so it really makes me question like who he's going to be able to throw to. But yeah, I think Russell Wilson definitely has a chance to do it with the Broncos. Like he still has quite a few more years left in him, and the Broncos have a really good young team that they're building right now. So I'd also agree with Eric that I don't think it'll be immediate, just because, while I think they're a good team, I still think they're the worst out of the 4 in the AFC West. So I do think they're going to miss the playoffs this year, but, give them a year or 2, get another draft pick or 2, maybe a couple other free agents here or there. And I definitely think the Broncos with Russell could be a serious contender, because, Russell Wilson was what was keeping that Seahawks team afloat for so long. And, now that he's actually going to be in a better situation with better weapons and, an actual defense, because the Seahawks had no defense the last couple of years, I definitely think Russell Wilson has a much better chance.
And I know everybody at home right now listening is probably screaming right now, and they're saying, "What about Carson Wentz? What about Carson Wentz?" And I'm gonna say, yeah, Carson Wentz. No, just kidding. Yeah, Carson Wentz.
I see what you did there, Zach. You trapped me and Connor by only giving us those two options. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just slid in there with the Carson Wentz, like didn't even give us a chance.
Yeah, no, I like what Connor said. I think Russ is clearly the better quarterback of the two, and I think, I do think it's unlikely this year, but yeah, give it some time. I think the Broncos definitely could be a team to watch. Whereas the Colts just seem to be recycling these old QBs. So we'll see how long Matt
Carson
Ryan
Wentz and now Matt Ryan. Take 3.
Yeah. So yep, that'll be it, guys. Thanks for listening and watching, and remember, as always, be clutch.
Bye.
Please.